Question number 4, Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to the autumn statement.
First Minister.
The autumn statement starkly set out the cost of Brexit to the UK economy and public finances, with economic growth and tax revenue revised downwards and borrowing and inflation sharply up. In responding, the UK Government had the opportunity to end its failed austerity policy. Instead, the Chancellor has continued with the cuts that are reducing budgets for public services and cutting the income of families across Scotland. While the small increase in capital investment announced yesterday is welcome, this is simply reducing the cuts that were put in place by the Chancellor's predecessor. By the end of the decade, our capital budget alone will still be around 8% lower in real terms than it was when the Conservatives came to power in 2010. We will publish the Scottish draft budget next month, and this will set out the measures we are taking to support our economy, tackle inequality and invest in public services, underlining the very different approaches our two governments take.
Bruce Crawford.
Thank the First Minister for her answer. Would the First Minister agree with me that the full extent of the Tories' reckless gamble with the nation's future is now laid bare for all to see in the autumn statement? As she says, with slower growth, higher inflation and tax revenue down. Do you also agree with me, First Minister, that the bombshell projection that the UK debt will now increase by a staggering £220 billion by 2020 if there is a hard Brexit makes it an absolute imperative that Scotland is able to remain in the single market by whatever means?
First Minister.
Well, the Tories don't like to hear this, because what we are hearing now is the reality of their recklessness on Brexit. £100 billion of additional borrowing, debt increasing by around £200 billion, debt to GDP ratio hitting 90%, lower growth and lower real wages, a real squeeze on living standards. That's the price of the Tory Brexit that Ruth Davidson and her colleagues seem now to be so enthusiastic about. Well, the Tories in Scotland might be the born-again Brexiteers, but this government will continue to stand up for Scotland's interests. We will continue to seek to protect our place in Europe, and yes, we will continue to find ways to protect our place in the single market, because that's what we need to do to protect jobs, to protect public finances and to protect the living standards of people across this country, because none of these things are safe in the hands of the Tories.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I suggest if the First Minister wants to find Brexiteers, all she has to do is look at the benches behind her. Now, the Chancellor's autumn statement delivers for Scotland £800 million extra capital spending, £74 million extra resource spending, £3.3 million extra for Scottish charities, a freeze in fuel duty, an increase in the personal allowance to help the lowest earners, an increase in R&D spending, and a city deal for Stirling and Clackmannanshire that the constituency members seem to have forgotten about in this question, and all this as part of the fastest growing economy in the G7. Why can't the First Minister, for once, stop being so miserable and just welcome this good news?
First Minister.
Well, I think most of the misery yesterday was coming from the Chancellor, not from anybody on this side. I remember the days when Murdo Fraser used to aspire to be a serious politician. Now he is simply delusional. The facts speak for themselves, and let's take account. Let's take account of the £800 million extra in capital, of the £74 million extra in revenue. Let's factor all of that in and see where we end up. We end up in a position where, by the end of this decade, our budget will not be £3.3 billion lower than it was when the Tories took office, as we were expecting. It will just be £2.9 billion lower than it was when the Tories took office. And yet the Tories expect us all to thank them for that. Well, that is the price of allowing the Tories to run our economy. And the difference between Murdo Fraser and the Conservatives and those of us in this House is we think we'd do a better job of running our economy ourselves. That's the choice that faces us.